The plate shattered on the hardwood floor, pieces scattering under the dining table and into the corner where the kids' backpacks usually sat. The loud crash wasn't what caught my attention. It was Emma's reaction, or lack of one. She stood there, staring down at the broken ceramic as if it were a stray leaf. Not a flinch, not a gasp, not even an attempt to clean it up. Instead, she simply turned away, leaving the mess behind as she walked toward the sink, her glass of wine still in hand. "Emma," I called, my voice sharper than I intended. "You just gonna leave that there?" She paused, her back to me, the sound of the running faucet drowning out the heavy silence that followed. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me. Then she glanced over her shoulder, her face unreadable. "I'll take care of it later." "Later?" I repeated, stepping forward, feeling the crunch of ceramic under my shoe. "You can't just." "Not now, Michael," she interrupted, her tone cold, detached. "I'm exhausted." And with that, she disappeared up the stairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen, the shards of our dinnerware scattered across the floor. That's when it hit me. Something wasn't right. Not the plate, not her reaction, not this distance between us that had grown so vast it felt like we were living in different universes. Emma wasn't the type to leave a mess. She wasn't the type to snap like that. But lately, she'd become a stranger. For weeks, I tried to convince myself it was just stress. Her new job, juggling the kids' activities, life in general, it all added up. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. The way she avoided eye contact, the late nights out for work dinners, the way her laughter sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. And then there were the missing pieces. Little things that didn't add up. A vague explanation here, a half-hearted excuse there. I'd find myself replaying conversations in my head, trying to figure out where the gaps were. But this moment with the broken plate felt like a metaphor I couldn't ignore. After cleaning up the mess, I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the shadows flickering on the walls. I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious husband who reads too much into things. But a voice in my head whispered otherwise, urging me to dig deeper, to stop pretending everything was fine. The real question was, did I want to know the truth? The first thing I noticed the next morning was the sound of silence. The kids were at school, and the house should have been humming with the usual noise of Emma bustling around. But there was nothing, no clinking dishes, no soft hum of a podcast in the background. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own thoughts, which had been running laps around my head since the plate incident. I found Emma in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the couch, scrolling on her laptop. She didn't look up when I entered, which wasn't unusual these days. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her for a moment. Her focus was sharp, too sharp. Whatever she was looking at, it wasn't casual. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Morning," she replied without looking up, her fingers tapping rapidly on the keys. "You're up early. Big day ahead?" She paused for a split second, just long enough for me to notice, then resumed typing. "Yeah, some deadlines. You know how it is." I didn't. Emma wasn't one to work from home unless absolutely necessary. Her office was her sanctuary, a place she claimed helped her focus. Yet here she was, in her pajamas at 8 a.m., glued to her laptop like her life depended on it. I watched closer, trying to glance at the screen, but she tilted it slightly away, an unconscious move that only fueled my unease. "What are you working on?" "Just stuff for the new event," she replied, her tone clipped. "Why?" "No reason," I said quickly, backing off. "Just curious." She finally looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Do you need something, Michael? Or are you just here to hover?" Hover. The word stung more than it should have. "I'll leave you to it," I said, retreating to my office upstairs. But I didn't forget the way she shielded her screen. I couldn't. It stayed with me like an itch I couldn't scratch. Later that day, an opportunity presented itself. Emma had left for a meeting, an actual one this time, unless she was lying about that too. The house was empty, and I found myself drawn to the living room. Her laptop was gone, but I noticed something else, her planner. Emma was meticulous about her schedule. Everything was color-coded, every appointment logged. Normally, I wouldn't have dared to snoop, but I wasn't feeling very normal anymore. I opened it to the current week. Wednesday, lunch with T. T, who the hell was T? There was no last name, no context. Just the letter. I flipped back through the previous weeks, looking for more, and there it was again and again. T appeared like a ghost, hovering in her planner at odd intervals, lunches, coffees, calls. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of every page. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew I'd need proof if my suspicions were right. Then I closed the planner and put it back exactly where I found it. That evening, Emma seemed more relaxed, almost cheerful, as if the distance between us didn't exist. She laughed with the kids, helped with homework, and even offered to cook dinner, something she hadn't done in weeks. But I couldn't enjoy it. My mind was elsewhere, turning over the mystery of T. When she finally went upstairs to shower, I took my chance. Her phone was on the counter, charging. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but my restraint was long gone. I tapped the screen. Locked. Of course. I tried her usual passcode, our wedding date. Wrong. Then her birthday. Wrong again. It wasn't until the third attempt, when I tried the kid's birth year, that the phone unlocked. Relief and guilt flooded me in equal measure, but I shoved them aside and started scrolling. Her messages were unremarkable family group chats, work texts, nothing suspicious. Then I saw it, an email thread marked T. My pulse quickened as I opened it. It wasn't long, just a few lines back and forth. T had sent a confirmation for a lunch reservation at an upscale restaurant downtown. Emma's reply was casual, thanking him and saying she'd see him there. But it was the closing line that hit me like a truck. Looking forward to it. X. An X. A goddamn kiss. I read it over and over, hoping I was misinterpreting, but there was no mistaking it. Whoever T was, he wasn't just a friend. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed up long after she went to bed, sitting in the dark with a beer in my hand, replaying the past few months in my head. Every late night, every vague excuse, every instance where she'd brushed me off or turned away. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to follow her. She had another lunch with T scheduled, and I needed to know. I couldn't live in this limbo any longer, wondering if I was paranoid or if my marriage was crumbling right before my eyes. When the day came, I told her I had a client meeting out of town and wouldn't be home until late. She nodded, barely looking up from her coffee. "Drive safe," she said. She didn't ask where I was going. She didn't care. I parked 2 blocks away from the restaurant she'd mentioned in the email. It was one of those trendy places with floor-to-ceiling windows and a patio full of potted plants. From my car, I had a clear view of the entrance. Emma arrived first. She was dressed sharply, her makeup flawless, her hair done in soft waves. She looked beautiful, and I hated her for it. A few minutes later, a man walked up to her. Tall, dark-haired, with a confident stride. He greeted her with a smile that seemed too familiar, and she responded with a laugh I hadn't heard in months. They hugged. Not the quick, polite kind of hug you give a coworker. This was longer, lingering, her arms around his neck, his hands on her waist. I couldn't breathe. I didn't go straight home after seeing Emma with him. I couldn't. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my chest felt like it was caving in. The image of them together, the way they hugged, the easy laughter, the way she looked at him, played on a loop in my head, each repetition slicing deeper into my composure. I drove aimlessly for over an hour, trying to decide what to do. Should I confront her the moment she walked through the door? Should I wait, collect more evidence, and hit her with everything at once? I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing: I couldn't let this go unanswered. She needed to explain herself. By the time I got home, it was late afternoon. The kids were still at school, and the house was eerily quiet. I sat in the living room, staring at the clock, waiting for her to return. I felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode the second she walked through the door. When I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway, my heart started pounding. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay seated. I needed to keep my anger in check, at least until I had the answers I was looking for. The door opened, and Emma walked in, carrying a reusable grocery bag and humming softly to herself. She froze when she saw me sitting there, her expression shifting from surprise to mild annoyance. "You're home early," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "I thought you had a meeting out of town." "I lied," I replied, my voice cold. "We need to talk." Her brow furrowed, but she didn't say anything. She started unpacking the groceries, her movements deliberate and slow, as if stalling for time. "Emma," I said sharply, standing up. "Stop pretending this is normal. We need to talk now." She sighed, turning to face me, her arms crossed. "What's this about, Michael?" "It's about you," I said, stepping closer. "It's about the lunches, the late nights, the distance. It's about the fact that I followed you today and saw you with him." Her face went pale, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second before she quickly masked her expression. "Him? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, my voice rising. "The man you had lunch with. The one you hugged like you couldn't bear to let go. Who is he, Emma?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the side as if searching for an escape route. "He's just a colleague," she said finally, her voice shaky. "We were discussing a project." "Don't lie to me," I interrupted, my anger boiling over. "I saw the way you looked at him. I saw the way he touched you. That's not how colleagues act." "It's not what you think," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, Michael, let me explain." "Then explain," I demanded, my fists clenched at my sides. "Tell me what the hell is going on, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having an affair." She flinched at the word, tears welling up in her eyes. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just happened." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "It just happened? That's your excuse? You just happened to betray me, to lie to my face, to throw away everything we've built together?" "It's not like that," she pleaded, stepping closer. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this, Emma? Was I not enough for you? Was our family not enough?" Her shoulders sagged, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I don't know," she said through her tears. "I don't know why I did it. I was lonely, Michael. You've been so distant lately, so wrapped up in work and the kids. I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I repeated, incredulous. "You felt invisible, so you decided to screw around with some guy? That's your justification?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't like that. He was just someone who listened, someone who made me feel seen." I stared at her, a mix of anger and disbelief churning in my chest. "Do you even hear yourself? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? How am I supposed to look at you after this?" "I'm sorry," she sobbed, reaching for me, but I stepped back, out of her reach. "I never wanted this to happen. Please, Michael, I love you." "Love?" I spat, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You don't betray someone you love. You don't destroy your family for a fling." "It wasn't a fling," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It wasn't physical." I froze, narrowing my eyes at her. "What do you mean, it wasn't physical?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. It didn't go that far. We talked, we spent time together, but we never slept together." "Do you expect me to believe that?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You expect me to believe you've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, meeting him in secret, and it's all been innocent?" "I swear," she said, looking up at me, her eyes desperate. "It never went beyond emotional. Emotional, I said flatly, shaking my head. Do you even understand how much worse that is? At least if it were just sex, it'd mean nothing. But this means you gave him a part of yourself that was supposed to be mine. Her sobs grew louder, and she sank to her knees, clutching at my legs. I'll do anything to fix this, she begged. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. I stepped back, her hands falling away as I looked down at her, my heart a tangled mess of pain and anger. I need time, I said, my voice hollow. Don't talk to me. Don't touch me. Just stay away. And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her crumpled on the floor, her sobs echoing in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room in the dark, staring at nothing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her tears, her broken confession. I thought about the years we spent together, the promises we made, the life we built. And then I thought about how easily she threw it all away for someone who made her feel seen. The anger came in waves, sharp, suffocating. But underneath it all, there was something else, clarity. I couldn't let this slide. She needed to feel the weight of her betrayal, to understand the damage she'd caused. The first step was to regain control. For weeks, maybe months, she'd held all the cards, living her double life while I was left in the dark. That ended now. I was going to take back the narrative, and if that meant playing dirty, so be it. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. When Emma came downstairs, her eyes red and puffy, I was at the table sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone. She hesitated at the doorway, clearly unsure of how to approach me. I didn't look up. "Good morning," she said, her voice tentative. "Morning," I replied flatly, not breaking my focus on the screen. She stood there for a moment, then walked to the counter to make herself a cup of tea. The tension in the room was palpable, but I refused to give her an inch. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to beg for it. I left the house shortly after breakfast, telling her I had errands to run. In truth, I needed space to think and a plan. The first stop was my lawyer. I wasn't ready to file for divorce yet, but I wanted to know my options. I told her everything, the lunches, the hugs, the lies. She listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. When she asked if I had any evidence of the affair, I told her about the emails and my suspicions. Her advice was simple: gather proof. The more I had, the stronger my position would be if things escalated. When I got home, Emma was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She turned to me as I walked in, her face a mix of hope and fear. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Not now," I said, brushing past her. Her shoulders slumped, but she didn't push. Good. I wasn't ready for round 2 yet. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I was polite but distant, cooperative but cold. I didn't bring up the affair, didn't ask questions, didn't give her any indication of what I was thinking. It drove her crazy. She tried to break through the wall I'd built, apologizing, pleading, promising she'd do anything to make things right. But I wasn't interested in her words. I wanted actions, or more accurately, reactions. The first phase of my plan began with a little digging. I started with her phone. While she was in the shower, I unlocked it and went straight to her email. The thread with T was still there, but it had been deleted from her inbox. Fortunately, I'd already saved screenshots of it. I checked her messages, social media, even her browser history, but there wasn't much. She was being careful, which only confirmed my suspicions. She wasn't done with him. Not yet. The second phase required a little more creativity. I created a fake email account and sent her a message pretending to be from an anonymous source. The email was simple: "I know about you and T, end it now, or everyone will find out." I wanted to see how she'd react, if she'd panic, if she'd come to me for help, or if she'd try to cover her tracks even more. The next day, I noticed a change. She was jumpy, constantly checking her phone and glancing over her shoulder. She barely spoke during dinner, and when I asked if something was wrong, she forced a smile and said she was just tired. It was almost too easy. I waited until she went to bed, then grabbed her phone again. Sure enough, there was a new email thread with T. She'd forwarded the anonymous message to him, asking if he knew who might have sent it. His reply was quick, reassuring her that it was probably nothing. He suggested they lay low for a while, which only confirmed what I already knew: this wasn't over. That night, as she slept, I started phase 3. I contacted a private investigator, a recommendation from my lawyer. I gave him everything I had: the emails, the schedule from her planner, the name T. He assured me he'd get to the bottom of it, no matter how careful they were. The next few weeks were a blur of tension and deception. I continued to play the part of the detached but cooperative husband, while Emma grew more anxious by the day. She started canceling plans, staying home more often, and spending more time with the kids. It was almost funny, watching her try to overcompensate for her guilt. But I didn't laugh. Not yet. When the investigator finally called with his findings, I wasn't surprised by what he'd uncovered. T was her co-worker, a senior manager at her company. They'd been seeing each other for months, meeting at hotels, sneaking off during work hours, even going on business trips together. He had photos, timestamps, everything I needed to blow her lies out of the water. That evening, I waited until the kids were in bed before calling her into the living room. She sat across from me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice wary. I tossed the envelope of evidence onto the coffee table. "This is about the truth, Emma. And it's time you told me everything." Her face went pale as she opened the envelope, her hands trembling as she sifted through the photos. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of shock and despair. "I can explain." "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. All of it. Right now." And for the first time in weeks, she told me everything. Emma's confession started hesitantly, her voice low and shaky. She spoke in disjointed fragments, pausing often, as if each word was a struggle to release. I didn't rush her. I didn't need to. The silence between her sentences was louder than anything she could say, and every pause gave me more control, more clarity. "It started a few months ago," she said finally, staring down at her lap. "It wasn't planned. I didn't go looking for it. It just..." She stopped herself, probably realizing how much worse it would sound if she said it just happened. "So, what?" I asked, my tone sharp. "One day you woke up and decided to destroy your family? That's your explanation?" She winced, and for a moment, I thought she might retreat into silence again. But then she looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time that night. "I was lonely, Michael. You don't see it, but you've been distant for a long time. You're always working or focused on the kids. I felt invisible." "Invisible," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That's your excuse. You felt invisible, so instead of talking to me, instead of saying something, you ran into the arms of some guy from work?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't deny it. "It wasn't like that at first. We were just friends, co-workers." He listened. He understood me. And I didn't? I shot back, my voice rising. "I've been here every single day, working my ass off to keep this family afloat, and you think I didn't understand you? You didn't even give me a chance." Emma buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she cried. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. "I swear, Michael. It wasn't physical. It was just emotional." "Emotional," I said flatly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "Do you even understand how much worse that makes it? You didn't just cheat on me, Emma. You gave him something that was supposed to be mine. You let him into a part of your life I thought was ours alone." "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did," I said, leaning forward, my voice cutting through her tears. "You hurt me, Emma. You betrayed me. And you didn't just hurt me, you hurt our kids. Do you even realize what you've done to them?" At that, she broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. I wanted to feel satisfaction, to see her crumble under the weight of her guilt. but all I felt was emptiness. Her tears meant nothing to me now. They were too late, too hollow. After what felt like hours, she managed to compose herself enough to speak. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'll do anything, Michael. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I'll quit my job if that's what you want. Just, please, don't give up on us." I stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to take her up on her offer, to make her pay for what she'd done by stripping away everything she valued. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I married, knew it wouldn't matter. No amount of therapy or apologies could erase the damage she'd done. "You want to know what I want?" I said finally, my voice calm but cold. "I want you to pack your bags and leave." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she hadn't heard me. "Leave," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Michael, please." "I'm done, Emma," I said, cutting her off. "This marriage is over. You made that choice the moment you let him into your life. But the kids. The kids will be fine," I said firmly. "They're stronger than you think. And they deserve better than this. They deserve parents who respect each other, who can look each other in the eye without resentment or lies." "Can you honestly say that's us?" She didn't answer, her silence speaking louder than any words. "I'll stay in the house with the kids," I continued. "You can find somewhere else to live. We'll figure out custody and logistics, but for now, I need you to go." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't argue. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she wiped her cheeks. "I'll pack some things," she said quietly. "Just, please, Michael. Don't shut me out completely. Let me try to fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said, standing up. "Not anymore." I walked out of the room, leaving her to face the mess she'd made. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. Like the life I'd spent years building had been stripped away in an instant. A few hours later, I heard the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. I didn't look out the window. I didn't say goodbye. I just sat there, alone in the dark, wondering what the hell came next. The following days were a blur. The kids noticed Emma's absence immediately, and I had to tell them something. I kept it simple, explaining that their mom and I were taking some time apart. They asked questions I couldn't answer, but eventually, they accepted it. Kids are resilient like that. As for me, I kept moving, kept working, kept pretending like I had everything under control. But inside, I was unraveling. I'd lost my wife, my partner, my best friend. And no matter how justified I felt in my decision, I couldn't shake the sense of failure that hung over me like a cloud. Emma didn't contact me for the first few days after she left, and I wasn't in a hurry to reach out either. The silence between us was a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief, because I didn't have to deal with her presence, her excuses, or her attempts to justify what she'd done. Dread, because I knew that eventually, we'd have to talk about the kids, about the logistics, about what came next. I focused on routine. The kids became my anchor, their schedules giving me a sense of purpose. Every morning, I made breakfast, drove them to school, and went to work. Every evening, I helped with homework, cooked dinner, and tried to keep things as normal as possible. They didn't ask much about Emma, and I didn't volunteer any information. I could see the confusion in their eyes, though, the unspoken questions. I hated that I didn't have better answers for them. One night, about a week after she left, Emma called. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when her name flashed on my phone screen. I stared at it for a few moments, debating whether to answer. Finally, I picked up. "What is it?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "I wanted to check on the kids," she said quietly. Her voice was strained, like she'd been crying. "How are they?" "They're fine," I replied. "They're adjusting." "Can I talk to them?" she asked. "They're asleep," I said, which wasn't entirely true. Sarah was upstairs reading, and Ben was probably playing video games. But I wasn't in the mood to facilitate a conversation. There was a long pause on her end. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Michael, Don't, I cut her off. Whatever you're about to say, don't. We're not doing this right now. She inhaled sharply, like she was trying to hold back tears. I miss them. I miss you. I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp. You should have thought about that before you threw everything away. Please, Michael, she said, her voice breaking. Can we at least talk? Not now, but soon? I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to say no, to shut her out completely and let her deal with the fallout on her own. But another part of me, maybe the part that still remembered the woman I fell in love with, knew that wasn't realistic. We had 2 kids together. Whether I liked it or not, she was going to be in my life for a long time. Fine, I said finally. We'll talk. But not now. Thank you, she said softly. I'll let you go. I hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. I told her I wanted to move forward with the divorce, and we discussed the details, custody, division of assets, everything. She was blunt but professional, laying out my options and advising me on the best course of action. I appreciated her clarity. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a shred of control over my life. That evening, I sat the kids down and told them the truth, or at least a version of it. I explained that their mom and I were separating, that it wasn't their fault, and that we both loved them very much. Sarah burst into tears and ran to her room. Ben sat silently, staring at the floor. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow. I couldn't promise them a happy ending. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I had a few conversations, mostly through lawyers. She moved into a small apartment across town and started seeing the kids on weekends. The arrangement was awkward but manageable. I avoided her as much as possible, keeping our interactions brief and focused on practical matters. One evening, she called and asked if we could meet in person. I hesitated but agreed. We met at a neutral location, a quiet park halfway between her apartment and the house. The kids were with my parents, so we had time to talk without interruptions. She was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, her hands folded in her lap. She looked tired, older than I remembered. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe. But I pushed it aside as I sat down across from her. Thanks for meeting me, she said, her voice tentative. What do you want, Emma? I asked, not bothering to soften my tone. She flinched but didn't back down. I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I crossed my arms, leaning back slightly. And what exactly are you sorry for? For lying to me? For betraying me? For breaking up our family? All of it, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was selfish and stupid, and I hurt the people I love the most. I hate myself for what I've done. Her words hit me like a brick, but I didn't let it show. I'd spent too many sleepless nights thinking about this moment, imagining what I'd say, how I'd react. Now that it was here, all I felt was exhaustion. I appreciate the apology, I said finally. But it doesn't change anything. You made your choices, Emma. Now you have to live with them. She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I know. I hope someday we can at least be civil. For the kids. That's up to you, I said. You want to be in their lives? Be a good mother. Show them that they matter more to you than your mistakes. I will, she said, her voice trembling. I promise. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, I stood up. I need to go. The kids are waiting. She looked up at me, her eyes full of regret. Thank you for meeting me. I nodded but didn't say anything else. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure, not peace, exactly, but something close. Life after Emma wasn't easy, but it was mine. I focused on the kids, on rebuilding, on finding a new normal. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the anger and sadness crept back in. But each day was a step forward, a chance to start again. And that was enough. What do you think about this story? Can betrayal be forgiven, or is it always the end of a relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion matters and might support someone else. And don't forget to like the video if you like this story.